to welcome everyone on behalf of the Philanthropy Club, and I'm Jackie Davidoff, principal of Davidoff Strategy. And I want to start by really lifting up the mission of the Philanthropy Club so that we all have a sense of alignment toward our own individual and organizational missions and communities. And the Philanthropy Club was founded by Gus Wilhelmy, who is the founder of the Safer Foundation here in Chicago. And Gus's vision was that and is, I think he's now in his 80s and he's still going strong, is that philanthropy is not the purview of a selected few. Philanthropy is designed to create equity in cultures and societies and people, and to shift resources and commitment and attention and dedication so that everyone has potential and everyone can thrive and communities can thrive. And I think these women here are really exemplar of carrying that mission. And I'm so honored that you're all with us today. So you all know our topic here today is philanthropic leaders transforming their boards. What can we all learn? And so I want to, we're gonna do just a quick overview about how this session is gonna run today so that you all are secure about participation. So, but I do wanna start with announcing and acknowledging our panelists. So we have with us Angelique Power, who is the president of the Field Foundation of Illinois, Cheryl Collins, CEO of Holy Family Ministries, and Gayla Brockman, President and CEO of Michael Reese Health Trust. So to set some context, I think that this conversation is especially relevant today. I think that the public and stakeholders of organizations and anybody who's involved in leadership is having a sense of we are all called to respond to the gaps that the pandemic and the revealing of what's always been so, which is around systemic racism in our country. We are all called to step up. And this, I think that you're going to be hearing about to the extent that these leaders and others are willing to set high expectations for themselves and for their boards and for their organizations, and to create alignment around that and what is needed and what is our best use, that will be creating impact and outcomes that I think we're all seeing we all are responsible for and called to. So I want to start with just a quick note in terms of housekeeping. This particular session, we have the intention to have this be really interactive. So rather than keeping the questions at the end, we're going to ask you to put your questions in the chat and we'll be peppering those throughout. So we're going to start with general introductions for each of the panelists. And then we have some questions prepared, and then we're going to I'll just keep looking at the chat. So I wanted to say that first of all. And then we really want this to be a community. So we want this to be a shared experience. We want you to put your name and organization and anything else, share resources right into the chat. And our belief is that the more that you put into this, the more that you'll get out of it. So Michelle, I think you need to find another link because this is the panelist link. So happy to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that.
Okay.
There aren't any links, so I'll try. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to start with the first question. You never know what's going to come your way. So we're going to, I'd like to invite each of you to start with your, whatever, you don't need to do it necessarily, but name, organization, mission, organizational mission, and then some element of what we talked about in terms of the background on your organization, anything about your observations about the role of a board, what you have sought to do with your board since you came into the organization, and just anything around that. And we'll have like 3 to 5 minutes each. Any order?
Okay, good morning. I'll go first. Welcome everybody. Hi, I'm Cheryl Collins, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Holy Family Ministries. Holy Family is a nonprofit organization located in North Lawndale, which is the west side of Chicago. Our mission is that we provide opportunities for under-resourced children and their families and youth. Basically, our largest organizational program is a school. It is a Christian school that serves K through 8th graders, private. Although private, we cater to low-income families. So we do about $8,000 per year fundraising per child for that school. We also have Adventures in Learning, which is our after-school summer camp program. Little Learners Academy, which is our preschool program for 3 to 5-year-olds, and the Peace Exchange, which is our youth leadership development program for 16 to 20-year-olds. And we run a resale shop in Arlington Heights called Lucille Resale Reinvented. You can shop online, by the way. And our mission basically is that we want to take children who really wouldn't have an opportunity for private education or for extraordinary experiences like traveling to India or places like that. And we want to give them that opportunity to really imagine and dream big through a quality education and through, like I said, unusual experiences such as travel. To that end, we have a board that is 24 strong in members. Our bylaws say that we could have 31 board members. And we at one point did reach that number, but it really is a large number of board members for a small organization such as Holy Family. Our budget, our annual budget, right now we're about at a $5.2 million budget. It varies or vacillates from about 4.5 to this is our highest budget due to COVID expenses for this year. But the board's role has always been one of fundraising. We have a very active fundraising board. They understand that they exist so that our programs can exist. They govern our organization. They decide basically on the programs that will be offered, and they ensure that we have the financial backing that we need to run those programs. Our board is also there to bring to us their network, their resources, their friends to help with the fundraising that needs to happen for our organization, as well as to advance the programs. And so they might bring resources to our principal or to our program managers that will help them to expand the offerings to the children. Little bit about me. I have, before becoming CEO, I've been CEO of Holy Family officially since 2017, but I've been with Holy Family since 2004. I started out as the principal of the school, and then our CEO, who was the founder of the organization along with her brother, retired. And then we had about a year of a transition with a CEO who didn't work out. And the board wanted me to become CEO. And initially I said no, but after about a year, I decided I will give this a try and I'll say yes. So I have a long history with Holy Family. I am an educator by trade, started out as a teacher, went to an administrator, then to principal, and now to CEO. And that's a little bit about me and Holy Family.
Thank you, Cheryl.
I'll jump in and go next. First of all, I just want to say hi to everybody who's putting their name in the chat. There are so many incredible, brilliant people, and it's so nice to be in conversation with everyone. My name's Angelique Power. I'm the president of the Field Foundation. I have a board. I sit on boards. I co-chair 2 boards. I'm on the board of Forefront, which is part of this conversation today. And I was struck by how many of you filled out the survey and have these really big, complicated questions and oftentimes issues with the board. And so I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. I'll tell you a little bit about the Field Foundation and some of the work that I have done there. I started at Field 5 years ago. And, you know, when I came to Field, I came sort of with this question, wondering if racial justice in philanthropy is an oxymoron or not. Is it something that's possible in a sector that has power and resources that doles them out on behalf of others? Is it possible to actually do systemic hacks and rethink all of that? I started with a staff and a board who were hungry for change and hungry for impact. And those mean so many different things. In the span of 5 years, and actually within 9 months of coming to field, we rolled out a new grant making model. We were rethinking what we do, who we fund, how we fund, metrics. And within 5 years, we've now begun all of these other journeys around our investments. We've introduced new board members. We've moved existing board members into a life director category, creating room for others. And so, and we've had these sort of friction moments. I call them like breakdown, breakthrough moments that I think are critical for us to have achieved as much as we can. But we by no means are the choir. We have folks that are coming at racial justice, newly coming at it, or have been practicing it in different ways. I think our challenge is really rethinking what is the role of a board member, what makes a good board member. And I also think that it's a different challenge for a foundation that isn't seeking funding from a board member to a nonprofit, and many of you guys are nonprofits that rely heavily on board members for unrestricted capital. But I hope today we can have some of these conversations where we ask ourselves, what is the role of a board member? What's a good board member? What's a bad board member? And how do you manage change so that folks can dig deeper into mission in this moment?
Awesome. Thanks, Angelique.
I have to say, I'm enjoying listening to both of you and look forward to the questions as well. This has been a delight, and I'm so pleased to be on and honored to be sitting here. Thank you all for attending. This is, as I understand it, to be interactive, so we welcome your thoughts and questions. I'm Gayla Brockman from Michael Reese Health Trust. Our mission is to advance equitable access to health solutions for all Chicagoans. We carry forward the vision of Michael Reese Hospital's Jewish founders and the generations of philanthropic leadership that they inspired. So Michael Reese is not like any foundation you've probably ever met. It is a public foundation. We used to be private, we've become public. So we both give out money and we also raise money. We incubate, we strengthen, we advocate for health solutions to ensure that all Chicagoans can live healthy lives. And we partner with Chicago organizations all throughout Chicago to provide grant funding and advisory support to advance work through incubation. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We also do grant making, and we also, because we're public, can be an advocate. And we carry on the values of the Michael Reese Hospital to provide quality, compassionate, and accessible health solutions to Chicago. So when I got to Michael Reese just 5 years ago, I came from another foundation, and I believed that Michael Reese could have a lot more tools in its toolbox if it was willing to take some big steps forward. I inherited a board that was divided into three segments. And so it kind of felt like an us versus them situation when I walked in the door. We have 17 board members, 9 of whom are appointed by a third party, which is complicated. My first order of business was to figure out a way that we would be a we. So how to eliminate the us versus them. And this may be a topic some of you are dealing with now. How do we become a we? Well, one of the easiest ways to become a we, I discovered, is engage your board in a robust activity. In our case, we decided to embark upon an entire organizational overhaul and strategic planning process. And this meant we actually rewrote the bylaws together. We came up with term limits. We reconfigured committees and board positions. We created whole new roles. We rethought our investment strategy. We slimmed down our grant making processes. We aligned our budget process to reflect the work and to give the team ownership of their departments. We rebranded. Some of you may have noticed we got a new website and we're still working on it now. I have a new logo and thing behind me that I was told to use. And we continue to do more to build our brand. And then we became public, which means that as a public foundation, as a private foundation, you must pay excise tax and you must give out 5% of your corpus each year. We didn't have a problem with the grant making piece. The piece I had a problem with is we came from a hospital. A hospital is a public, and it was a public hospital. It was a publicly supported institution. Why is it that we are private and we are acting like a private company? So with the board, we had some hard conversations. This was a difficult topic, but I said to them, there is a way for us to become public, and there is a way for us to eliminate this excise tax. This is community money. It shouldn't be going to the government. It should be going to you. So it was a compelling case, and with a little work, we are now able to be public. We do have to raise money. We don't have to raise a lot because we are the beneficiaries of trusts from the hospital that throw off income. Complicated, and anybody who's interested in the details of that, I'm happy to take that offline. But now, as a public foundation, we have a lot more tools in our toolbox. We can incubate new initiatives, partnering with you, those who align with our mission, who want to try something new or want to scale something. We're willing to take those risks, bring the monies and infrastructure to the project, and help you grow it. We also can fail. If we fail in an initiative, we can fail fast and not go out of business. And we also can be an advocate. We can work with you to identify the policy opportunities and elevate them. So I'll stop there. Lots to discuss. Back to you, Jackie.
Okay, thanks so much, Gayla, Cheryl, and Angelique. So we're gonna set some broad context now for overview. What do you need and expect from your board as mission drivers, as leaders, and what is the ideal and where are the gaps? So anything in there that speaks to you?
I'll jump in first. I think supportive mission is extremely important. And I don't think a board needs to understand everything about projects and programs and get into the weeds of everything that's going on. I assume net zero knowledge retention with my board between meetings. And so I always am repeating, this is what we are doing in this area and I encourage my staff to do the same. I'm on a lot of boards and it's hard to remember what everyone's doing. So I don't think that's a sign of a good board member to be deeply in the weeds, but to be a stakeholder in the mission. I want a board member to be engaged in meetings and to come ready. And that's also on me. I have to, if I see Tatiana Cortez is here, she was a field fellow. She knows all that goes into preparing for a board meeting. It's deep. We have a beautiful board book that we send out well in advance to give people time. We ask them to fill out information and ask questions prior and send it to us. Although they're welcome to in the meeting, we prepare them to be good board members, not only to read what we have, but to know where we want them to focus, as opposed to just sort of expecting everyone to come into the boardroom knowing this. I think a good board member is someone who leaves their baggage at the door. And I think that's hard for some. I think you see that in these spaces, there's a psychology of people being in the room together where some folks feel like they need to prove something or be heard in some way. And I think, boards aren't the place to be right or to be special or to be a power hoarder or to be the provocateur. Let the work be right and special and have power and be provocative. And then I think a good board member is someone who is supportive of staff. And, you know, I could just say that like over and over again for the rest of this panel. I think, you know, you have to recognize as a board member that people are working extremely hard. They're most proximate to the work. They are the experts. See them. And I think even in this moment, you know, how people have like risen to the occasion. Being a good board member means really seeing what staff are bringing to the table. I also think a good board member is someone who is their full self. And the reason they're on the board, and I actually think we need to shift the reason people are on boards, but we can talk about that later. But, you know, I've been gifted to be on boards or work with boards where they're giants and they come with their full selves and their full curiosity. As the leader of an organization, it's on me to establish a culture that feels like a learning culture. I do that by asking all my questions that are, you know, could be stupid questions. I'm the first to say like, wait, what is this in investments? Like, what are we talking about here? I don't know what that means, you know? And then that unlocks other people to ask their questions. And so we realize that as a board, our job is to be the spine of an organization, to support the organization, not to be the heart and not to be the mind, but to be the spine. And so I'll stop there.
I'd like to jump in if that's all right. I look at my role as part of my role as ensuring that the board members who choose to be on our board, and they do choose to be on our board, have the best experience possible. So one of the things I do is spend a lot of time getting to know each one and figuring out what makes them tick, what concerns them, where their pain points, and then design an experience just for them. So similar to what Angelique said, some of my board members like to stay at the 30,000 foot level and watch how we move and shift and address the key issues. But some of my board members need that detail. And so I invite them to site visits or committee meetings that they don't belong to, but have them sit in and listen, or different kinds of convenings, so that I can address some of those things that I know will help them become advocates of the work. So for me, each board member is another tool in our toolbox to move our mission along. How we intentionally pick our board members. I did mention previously that a third party appoints 9 of our board members. And when I first joined the board, it wasn't the warmest relationship where we had any say in those board members, but over the years, we've built that relationship quite strongly. And now we are actually able to ask for what we need. And one of the things I do need is, being a healthcare funder, is I need more clinicians on my team. I need people who are on the front lines, who understand, especially during the pandemic, what is happening, and to help educate the board. They're better at telling the board what's going on than I am, their practical experience. So, you know, designing what you need, intentionally going after those kinds of skill sets or experiences, and then nurturing those so that you meet the needs of the board member, but you also are meeting the needs of the foundation. And there's this gentle balance that you have to maintain at all times. But key here is get to know your boards and intentionally pick those that will align with what your needs are at the time.
And Jackie, if I can jump in, first off, I'm so glad I went last. I just really enjoyed it. I took a tip. I wrote down what you said. Gayla, design an experience for each board member. I love that. I love that. And I'm going to use that. You know, I want to talk about the ideal and the gap question that you asked, Jackie. For me, an ideal board is a board that is highly engaged. So for us, we have a small organization. And so engagement means to me that every board member comes to the meetings ready to participate. We too, like Angelique, we send out the information to them at least 7-8 days before the meeting, so they have time to read the reports. And I'm trying to shift our meetings from just report out, because that's why you get the report, so you can read it. We have deeper, more meaningful, more significant things we should be discussing at those board meetings, such as how do we move the strategic plan from paper to being to action to what's going to really enhance our organization. An ideal board to me is a board that is a working board. So they don't show up with ideas. You know how you go to those board meetings and they have all these wonderful ideas, and then the staff walks away with 50 to-do things that they to add to their to-do list? Well, to me, an ideal board takes some of those 50 things and they realize that, you know, we can help. How can we help? And they ask, how can we help? Not so much to get in the weeds, but just to alleviate some of the work from the staff, because the staff has enough on their plate. An ideal board also is not afraid to ask for money. They should be asking for money. I mean, certainly we have a development officer and a development team, but the board member's job is to ask for money too, and not be shy about that. And if they don't know how, to say, I'd like to know how. And the board member's job is to help find other board members, particularly folks who don't look like them, because many of our board members are white. And so we have to stretch. And I'll talk a little bit about how I did that with my board, helping them to stretch and help to find more members of color. And the gaps, we have a board. Our board has, many members of our board have been on our board for 15 or 20 years. There's no tenure. And that's still a challenge I'm facing, getting tenure in the officer positions and also with our board members. And moving from the founder's mindset to more of my mindset. And that's been a challenge for us as well, moving away from sort of a mom and pop operation to a larger scale operation that I have vision and plans to do for Holy Family.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. So I want to go to the chat now. I think this question is particularly relevant, especially based on all the comments that we got in that survey for the early registers. They're your sale to register early. So this question is from Tatiana Cortez. In your respective areas, how do you honor where people are in their racial equity journey and bring them along in a way that encourages them to do the internal work that is necessary to do racial equity externally?
Looking at you, Cheryl, I'm like, do you want to go first this time? Do you want me to?
Sure. I'll go first. Good question. And I don't know if I have it right. You know, why is this so hard? You know, this is the question that I ask myself. I am the first to say that this is a difficult area and one to be very careful with. We have, as I said, right now we have 24 members on our board, and here's our breakdown. So we have 24 members, actually 23, because I am the 24th board member. I do count as a board member, but 23 board members. And of those 23 board members, 6 are Black. So that tells you, and all the rest are white. And that's better than when I came aboard. So I'm working to improve that each and every month, actually, just doing more work to improve that stat right there. 16 are male. That tells you something else about our board, white male board. When we never had these conversations until George Floyd was murdered. When George Floyd was murdered, and we had a board meeting the very 2 days after that happened, and it was so tense. And it was a virtual meeting because we were in the pandemic, and no one mentioned it until the very end of the meeting. And one board member said, "We're not going to talk about this." And I was so grateful for the board member, because I was in my feelings and I wasn't sure how to have this conversation. And it was a great conversation. And since then, I've set about to do racial town halls on race, not specifically with my board, but with some of our church founding partners, because we have a lot of churches that support us. I've invited board members, not mandated it. In the board meetings, I actually have done 3 meetings that involved issues of race. And now I'm moving to more optional, because what I'm finding is a lot of fear. I've had some very honest conversations with board members that some have said to me, "I'm not comfortable with these conversations." And that really hurts in some ways. But it also is, I acknowledge their truthfulness. And I say to them, I'm not comfortable either, but we have to have them. And not to have them is not right. Our population of students is 98% Black. 98% Black. to not have conversations about race is wrong. There's something very wrong here. And we have to get over our discomfort and have these conversations. And so to that end, I've made, a couple of faux pas. I have one speaker that was so insulting to our board, and I really thought I was going to be fired. I'm not honest, because she basically told them they had established a white privilege board, a board of white privilege, and they didn't take that well. But what I've learned is that, I need to continue to have these conversations, and I need to find everyone's space of discomfort and enter that with them, and letting them know that I'm uncomfortable too, and letting them know the bigger goal is that our children will have what they need, because the people on this board will understand our children and their needs better. And that's where I'm going with this. So I don't know that I have all the answers to it. I can just say that you keep going, even if you have missteps, even if you make mistakes, and even if you have faux pas, you keep going with the conversations.
Great. Angelique, Gayla,
Yeah.
do you want to?
I mean, I would say that for me, 5 years ago, when I went to field, a part of what I was really curious about is if we could take this race agnostic social impact sector, where those who are in power often are wealthy white people, boardrooms often are wealthy white progressive academic leaning spaces, and we could actually, that are serving communities of color, but never are we actually addressing the default operating system in America, which is racism. Inside of ourselves, we bake it into our institutions, we've designed it exquisitely in all of our systems, but we don't know how to talk about race. We just don't, not in mixed company. And so we are complicit in upholding these systems because we're so scared of offending and so scared of being offended. And so we sort of chug along, and the system creates the same outcomes. When I started at Field, I knew that we could not have a strategic plan and then have a side rail around diversity, inclusion, that is actually just the way that we always uphold these inequitable systems and then trim at the margins. And so it was really important to me to bring racial justice training into the boardroom. And I've said this before, but what's been happening, especially, in 2016, yes, this was happening, but now inside most institutions, the staff has already been through these trainings. They've actually been doing a lot of this work, and yet it never reaches the board level. So we start code switching as soon as we get into the boardroom. And in many ways, it's not fair to the board. Any board needs to know that if they are not working on their fluency in analyzing racialized outcomes and being able to talk about race across difference, then they are behind in anything that they're doing. And so at the same time, Cheryl, I feel you. As a Black woman, you're not there to try to educate everyone on their internalized racism and internalized superiority around race. Like that is, you have to have training in order to do that. And so it was important to us to bring racial justice training into the boardroom. It was breakdown, breakthrough moments. There are still friction moments around this, mainly because the real work of racial justice and operationalizing it isn't sensational. It's pretty banal, to be frank. It's an everyday meta reflection on power and how it benefits, folks that are wealthy and white and of certain privilege, or those of us of color who have, internalized the caste system of whiteness. And so we have to look in foundations, we have to look at our policies, we have to look at our applications, we have to look at our metrics, we have to look at our investments and where they've gone, we have to look at who we hire, who we think is a good board member. All of that is how racism actually is just shining and manifesting every day. But I would say it has to be centered. I mean, we're late on it. if it isn't actually something that isn't a one and done, but is constantly practiced in the boardroom. And that is the focus of organizations, which I think actually helps as it manifests. It helps when someone says, hey, this is a white privilege organization. Then the board doesn't say, I'm offended. They say, we know. And these are the ways that we're trying to work on it. But it's scary. And Cheryl, you're speaking for so many people right now, I'm sure, that are in the chat. Like they cannot go through it alone. They have to have outside help in leading this work.
Thank you. So I'm toggling between the chat and let's talk about leadership, because I think it relates to what you're talking about right now and all the conversations that we're having around what has this work, your leadership, brought out in you, challenged you with. Where have you seen yourself step up, and where do you see that you still have gaps, as we all do? And how would you talk about that in a way of recognizing our common mutuality in really challenging ourselves toward our potential and our capacity?
I'll start, but I'm sure my colleagues have much to say on this topic. Just for me, I feel that my role is to surround myself with people who can teach me. I have learned a long time ago, I don't have many answers, but I do quickly learn where to get them and how to bring them along. The previous question, I'm not one to be the educator, but I knew where to find resources to help bring my board along when it was ready. Our team, our staff have wanted to do racial equity training and build racial equity into everything that we do for years. And the pressure was on me to bring that as a leader to the board. But my board, I knew my board wasn't ready and couldn't have done it any sooner if not for what happened this summer. And I'm sorry for all the horror that took place, but that horror is resulting in serious change, especially for Michael Reese, because we were ready. Our board came along, we had board members driving the process, not Gayla Brockman driving the process. So that's the other piece I would advise, is find someone else beside yourself to move the needle and build a coalition around that. I can have a great idea, but if I have no support to do it and no expertise that's going to comment on the benefits of it outside of myself, it's not going anywhere. So as far as leadership, figure out where your resources are, where the experts are, bring them to the table, and let the conversation flow.
Thanks. Others?
Sure. The leadership, we were talking about this a little bit before this started. For those who tuned in early, Gayla asked me if I like what I do as CEO, if I like being CEO, and I said, I do. When I first started being CEO, I hated it. I will be quite honest. I didn't know what I had gotten myself into. I did not like it. And the reason I didn't like it is because it was such a shift for me. It was new. It was unknown. I did not know or feel like I knew exactly what to do. I remember asking our former CEO, because she was still on the board, and she's a founder. And I said, what do you do all day? Like, I couldn't figure it out at first. Well, that changed real fast. But one of the things that this has taught me, this role as CEO has taught me, is a lot about me. And it has shown me my strengths, my weaknesses. It has shown me my vulnerabilities. And it continues to show me that constantly. One of the things that I think is most important for leaders is to truly, truly, truly get coaching. I was blessed to have a coach when I first started in this role. And now I also have another coach right now. And And because of that coaching, I was able to become far more aware of Cheryl and where Cheryl had gaps and where Cheryl wasn't right. And where Cheryl, not to say was anything wrong with not being right, but where Cheryl wasn't her strong or her best self, and how reactionary Cheryl could be. And all of these things still show up, but I'm more aware of them now and working on those. And it's really important because, you know, when you enter the room as CEO, people have expectations of you, you have expectations for yourself. But what's really important with your board particularly is knowing, for example, your triggers. You know certain things are going to trigger you, and so, or certain people may, or certain attitudes may. And so you're very mindful as to, if I want the best out of this experience for myself, for the people I serve, I can't just go flying off the handle because this person said something that might be culturally insensitive or racially insensitive or just ignorant. And ignorant meaning not, they don't know, not stupid. They just don't know any better. And so I have to show up in a different way. And that has to be recognizing how I'm feeling, but also recognizing that I cannot be reactive, that this is my moment to teach, to say, let's look at it from this perspective. Have you thought about it from this way? And here's why this is important to think about it from this way. So really know yourself and engage in some work to further develop yourself as a person first, before you, and then as a leader second.
Cool. Thank you, Cheryl. And I see that in you. I'm going to go to Barb Vickery's question. Can you talk about what the ideal relationship looks like between CEO and board chair? It's often a tricky relationship to balance in terms of moving the organization forward, especially as we look at racial equity and racial justice.
I'll say this is such a critical relationship. And I think a part of it is where the organization is and where you are as a leader. When I first started at Field, it was really important to me to be in constant contact with my then board chair, Lyle Logan. And so he would meet with me pretty regularly. I think the first 6 months we talked like every week just to check in. There was a lot of change that was happening. We rolled out that new grant making in 9 months. And so when you're churning through a tremendous amount of change and learning about the organization, I think really being lockstep with your board chair is so important. And even now, Gloria Castillo is my board chair, and she and I check in periodically as needed. She is a cheerleader. She runs interference. She has this long view. She's a mentor. And I think that all of that is extremely important. And then as a board chair, I'll say I'm a co-board chair of Enrich Chicago, which is an organization that I co-founded. It's a nonprofit that's focused on anti-racism in the arts. And organizations that have been doing racial justice work in 2020 are exhausted. And so as we got toward the end of the year, we were in a board meeting, and Nina Sanchez, who is a rock star who runs Enrich, after the meeting, me and the other board chair, Carlos Hernandez, we got on the phone and we were like, is Nina okay? She seems exhausted. And the role of the board chair in that moment was to reach out to her and say, we need to help you. We don't think we think you have too much on your plate. We think you need to take a couple weeks just to be with your family. Everyone has been, had family who had been hospitalized with COVID. We've seen loss. And so sometimes the role of a good board chair is to say, let me help in the way that you specifically need. And so with her, lockstep, we're changing the leadership model of Enrich Chicago to 2 co-directors, as opposed to a hierarchical executive director, with her weighing in on job description, not being part of the search process until the very end, really saying like, how do we design a structure that supports you better? Those are some of the roles that I think a board chair needs to play.
That's awesome. Thanks, Angelique.
I'll just quickly say I'm very lucky because we went through a board chair change, and I had a terrific board chair when I started who really helped manage with me as a partner, massive change. Well, two things I want to say. One is get to know your board chair right away. Figure out if he's or she a micro or macro manager. How much information do they need? How often do they need it? And once you figure that out, you then can adjust your own style to work with that personality or that type of leader. I went from my previous board chair was more macro, and now my new board chair I thought was going to be more micro, but it seems it's turned out he prefers to meet quarterly unless I need more. And I often talk to him more often, or he'll just check in and see how I'm doing, which is great. But he likes to bring the executive vice chair with him to every meeting, which is interesting. So in essence, and it's a female, in essence, I feel like I have two partners now in this work and and they're very different people. And so it's been an amazing partnership where I feel I have these two mentors, I have these two coaches, I have these two friends, I have these two colleagues who I can really work with to bounce ideas off, think through things before they go forward, and build advocacy around ideas. So it's almost a team approach now. So if you have that opportunity to build your relationship with your chair and the next person in line who theoretically could take over, I highly recommend it. It's been a great experience for us.
Yeah, I will just add, I agree with everything Angelique and Gayla said. I have a board chair and a vice chair. We meet weekly, every week, 9:15 Thursday. That's our time to talk, and we talk until we're done. And I mean, we try to, we have an agenda. I usually present the agenda for things I want to talk about, but then they bring things they want to talk about, and they are my helpers. They are my friends. They are my colleagues. I often would refer to them as boss, and we would laugh because they say, we know you're the boss. But it's just funny. But, I say, no, you're the boss. And we just go back and forth and play like that with each other. But the one thing I would say is be honest. Don't hide anything. These people are here to help you. The board chair is your friend. They should be. It should be a very cordial, open, honest relationship. And when you run into things that you don't agree with, you say, I don't agree with what you're saying. And you're okay with the person telling you that too, because you're not going to agree on everything. But they are your advocates, and you have to see them as that way. And because of that, and it didn't start off that way, I have to say, with my board chair. It took time for us to get to that relationship. And it truly happened a lot because of the pandemic. Because once the pandemic started, I think we went from talking once a week to talking every day. And through those daily conversations, we really learned a lot about each other and how each other thinks and how each other's feeling, and became true supports to each other.
Thank you. That's great, Cheryl. I want to go now to the chat. There's two questions that I want to ask. One is from Kathleen Jacob. And I think this is a common situation for people who are not in positions of leadership at their organizations. How can we advocate for racial justice training for our board if our staff leadership is not organizing it or making it a priority?
I mean, there's so many warriors inside of organizations that are trying to carry the water on racial justice work. I think often they're folks of color, not always, but often they are. And they feel responsible to move the organization forward. And what I always say is that your job is to absolutely be a stakeholder in the mission of an organization, but get a master's in the resistance that you're facing. Like, it's not on you to take that organization to liberation. Maybe your job in that moment is just to understand the elegant resistance to the work. And you will use that in other places. And so, that's what I would advise. If the board won't do it, understand all the ways, all of the pushback. That will serve you well somewhere else.
I think that's great. And I also, as a believer in as women, we are called to lead from our values and be willing to generate uncomfortable conversations as mission drivers. And so I'm, Kathleen, I would say to the extent that you can keep this moving and front and center and not just stop, that's going to be, you will create change. I really believe that in whatever way. Strategizing, getting allies. Awesome. Okay, I want to ask Felicia's question, so I'm just going to keep going here. Felicia Davis at Chicago Foundation for Women. Chicago stands out in the number of women of color leading some of the largest philanthropic organizations, as we know. That notwithstanding, these leaders face many of the additional burdens you've already noted. It begs the question, did board members make these appointments just for cover? Once appointed, how can we support these leaders? And you are among them.
I'm going to let my colleagues answer that, but I just want to say hi to Felicia. Hi, Felicia.
Hi, sorry, my daughter just came into the room. If you saw me like remote learning.
Okay.
Hi, Felicia. Maria Peschiera is here too. So many leaders in the philanthropic space. Yes. The answer to your question is yes. I think that people have felt for some time, that there needs to be a difference in terms of how someone looks in running an organization. But institutions have not actually, they've been working on diversity and inclusion for so long, and equity is so different. It really is about shifting power and in all of like value systems and narrative and policy and resources. And so I think that often, folks are surprised. They make a hire and then that leader comes in as a visionary leader and actually wants to execute on the mission and on racial justice, and then you run into that elegant resistance. And so, you mentioned the women of color leading foundations. There's a group called Woke. There's 20 plus of us that meet regularly to establish a bench and to really work together on these changes that are actually what our institutions are charged to do. And so I have overlapping sister circles that are not always within philanthropy. Often it's women of color who lead any organization. So I think it's really important that we get a bench outside of work as a resource for some of the real challenges that I think, Cheryl, you described vulnerably, but like some of the real challenges that we're being asked to do at this time.
Felicia, I had the honor of hearing you at, I think it was something CWIP did. Or maybe, yeah. So great. Nice to see you on, Felicia. The interesting thing is, yes, I do think that what we're dealing with in our country is the sort of the reaction to cancel culture. So many organizations led by white men are now looking at the fact that their organizations led by white men and they need to change. So they're establishing these leaders of color, putting in, Black women or Black men of color. And as Angelique said, I think they're surprised at what they get because they don't just get a token. They get someone who has a brain, who has a voice, who has a heart, who has a soul, who has a vision. I can only speak for Holy Family. I wasn't chosen. I chose this because I was asked to become CEO. I said no. I was asked many times. I kept saying no. And finally, through coaching, I decided my no was out of fear. And I love this organization. I've been with her since 2004. And if not me, then who? Like, who will lead? And so I stepped up and said yes. And I do think that the principal Cheryl, the principal of the school, Cheryl Collins, is different from the CEO, Cheryl Collins. And I think that has surprised some board members. It surprised me. So I think that, they are surprised by my assertiveness, and they are surprised by, just my drive and my vision and my refusal to say that's good enough, because it isn't. And we have to keep going until we find what's best for your child who lives out in, Arlington Heights or Naperville is what I want for the children who live in West Garfield Park and Austin and things of that nature.
Can I just add one thing? Yes, I'm not a woman of color, but I do want to say it took the people of color on my board to move the agenda forward and address the racial inequities in our own internal practices. And now that that ball is well moving down the field, I am able to elevate various opportunities in each of our areas, whether it be grant making, investments, finance, and any of the other activities that a foundation does, where I can elevate those opportunities that will promote structural change and shift that balance of power. So it took the persons of color on our board to move to get that momentum going. But now as a leader, I am able to bring those opportunities and thoughtful changes to the table. So it's a partnership, just like anything else. And I'm grateful that those in those seats were strong enough and courageous enough to take those steps forward so that we can really make change.
Cool. Thank you, Gayla. Another question that a lot of people talked about in the survey or responded to is around engagement. And I'm wondering, what would you all say about how do you how do you amp up the expectations of your board in a very specific and direct way so that you move from, what may be a traditionally play it safe, not really rock the boat board to getting what you need as leaders?
Sure, I'll start with that. When I started out in my new role as CEO 3-4 years ago, the one thing I noticed, our board meetings were very quiet. We had a group of folks who would always voice their opinion. They would. Okay, I can tell what he's going to say. He's about to say it, and then we had a group of people who just never said anything. And so the first thing I did was I talked to my board chair about that. I said, everybody's voice is important. Call on people who aren't speaking, because it's important that if they come to the meeting, we hear what they're thinking. I'll bet they have some thoughts, but maybe they just feel a little bit shy or introverted because, the stronger voices in the room are more dominant. And so we started to do that. We started to call on people who weren't saying anything. The next thing I did was I created every year I have a meeting with every board member, one-on-one, just myself and that board member. And pre-pandemic, we would meet for lunch or coffee or breakfast or whatever. And post-pandemic now we're having virtual or phone call meetings once a year. And the first question I ask is, how do you feel about being a member of our board? How do you feel? Are you excited? Are you enthusiastic about it? Do you still want to be on our board? And some of those have said no, which is good. I intend to step off in the next 6 months. Great. Thank you for letting me know. I intend to step off within the year. Great. Thank you for letting me know. And that has yielded some of our people moving off the board. But that's good to know. And others have said, I feel wonderful, but I don't feel like I'm being utilized to my full potential here. And I'll say, well, have you thought about what you want to do? Like, what would make you feel more included? The other thing we did was we created we have a board development committee. That was something I started when I came on board. We did not have that board development committee. And the role of that board development committee is to help find new board members, to orient new board members, but also to continue to educate and engage current board members. And so one of the things we created was a board engagement standard. And we gave it to all the board members. The first year we just talked about it. The second year we asked the board members to rate themselves. How do you rate yourself as an engaged board member? And there are 5 sets of criteria on that standard. And then next year I'm going to rate them along with the board member. And so I think that, engaging the board, letting them know that we have expectations for you to follow as board members, things that we're looking for you to do as board members, and how do you see yourself fitting into those standards. So those are some of the ways that we've engaged our board, and continuous one-on-one conversation, I think, has been key for me to know how they're feeling about being a member of our board.
Again, I'm sorry, you can see my child coming in and out. There was a graphing paper emergency that happened.
Oh, fine.
So I think, there were a couple of questions in the chat about life director. And so I think roles of the board is really important around engagement. for us, there were folks that had been on the board for such a long time. One of my favorite surprises of this job is that Marshall Field V, who's been on the board for 50 years, is a delight. And I love my relationship with him. I never thought that that would be a sentence that I would say, growing up with Marshall Field stores, but he's a delight. And he also shares power very differently. His vernacular is not about racial justice, but he has always shared power in a really interesting way. I think finding allies on the board who understand not only what the mission is, but they are really focused on supporting you and your vision and making you successful is extremely important. There's only so much work you can do as the staff member and CEO or board member, which it became important to me to become a board member also of Field Foundation after about a year, which is something else we can talk about later. But so he actually, through a conversation together, I was like, in our bylaws, we actually talk about a certain age moving people to life directors. And he was like, let's do it. Let's move some people off. I don't think that people over 70 should have a say in boards or something like that. He was joking, but he's like, I'll go first. And if I move to a life director role, then all of these other people will come too. And that's exactly what happened. And so there's only so much that you can do on your own. You need allies on the board that help redefine roles. A life director, and someone asked, is someone who is, on the board in perpetuity, doesn't have to be voted on again, but doesn't have voting, can't chair committees, doesn't have to come to meetings, but can. Our life directors are super engaged in what we're doing. But again, they don't have a vote anymore, and they can't take active roles. So I think roles and responsibilities is something, one, that needs to happen. And we're actually in a process of trying to figure out how do we, my board chair, Gloria, is meeting with each board member to talk about, in a Racial Justice Foundation, what is the role of a good board member? What is the responsibility? And what is the term? And so really, we're trying to kind of look at that. And I saw there's someone from Board Source here paying attention too, and I'm sure they have great information, but we have to rethink what a board member is. In nonprofit settings, a good board member is someone who has a lot of money and is willing to give it freely in an unrestricted way, which is super important because an organization needs working capital. But there's a fundamental issue, which is the thought that someone who has proximity to capital is a good board member. And that's just not true. And so how are we able to actually have big unrestricted gifts from stakeholders, but really redefine what it means to serve a board? And we need to do that in foundations too. Often we have folks that have an academic interest in the issues that we address, as opposed to lived experience. So how do we toggle the notion of what a role and responsibility of a board member is? The other thing that I think is on us is to make this stuff easy to understand. Like a budget, I think budgets obviously are, the moral compass of an organization, the blueprint of values, but they're also super complicated and hard to understand. And so whenever I do a budget, I explain everything, every column, what's tucked into every little thing, so that everyone can be engaged and find their way in. I think sometimes board members are like, really interesting, because they just don't know what the heck you're talking about, And in investments too, as I already mentioned, really unpacking some of the terms. We created glossaries. We'll pause and say, like, wait, what does that mean? When we start to get to, into acronyms and making assumptions, that just blocks people out who really should be and need to be engaged. And then assigning people things. We did this last year. We had 2 summits where we were sort of studying together these bigger ideas around purchasing power and spending policy, and what does it mean to actually have social responsible investing and racial justice in an endowment. That takes a long time. You got to bring in people and ask a lot of questions. And in one of our summits, I assigned Kathy Cohen, who is a brilliant human being who's on our board. She's a professor at University of Chicago and helped to co-found BYP 100. I assigned her to talk about what is the role of a racial justice foundation over the next decade with movement building. And I assigned Stephanie Field Harris, who is one of the Field daughters, to talk about what is the role of managing an endowment in perpetuity. Now, understanding that everyone is coming at it from a good place, but they have very different notions, and that we have the ability and the responsibility to listen to these ideas and then thoughtfully debate them with each other. Something that's not happening in the country, to talk across difference. That is one of the blessings and responsibilities of being on a board.
Just to add to my colleagues who have covered so much, just to add that we require every board member to sit on a committee, and our committees are incredibly active. They meet really regularly, and they all come and we engage them. So much like your organizations, the work gets done in the committee. And so that's where you'll see the engagement and figure out what committee works best for that board member or committees. I either got really lucky or I figured it out that what my board members are interested in, because every single board member sits on a committee and is engaged. So I only have 17 board members. Size matters. I would like to actually grow it now that we are raising money, but for now, it's a good number, an easy number to manage.
Thanks, Gayla. So I want to go back to some of the conversation that we had during our planning meeting, and you each mentioned themes that I think people would be curious to learn more about. So Gayla, you mentioned trust. You talked about the ideal as having a high level of trust between you and your board, and I thought that would be something that folks would like to hear more about.
Well, that begins at the beginning. So let me go back to the beginning, and that is we are a foundation created, conversion foundation created as the result of a sale of a public asset, which was Michael Reese Health Plan and Michael Reese Hospital. And if you know the beginnings of Michael Reese Hospital was created, like many hospitals across the country, by Jewish communities as a place for Jewish physicians to practice who were not welcome at other hospitals. And even into the 50s and 60s, there were quotas on how many Jewish physicians could practice. So this isn't such old history. People are shaking their heads. They're aware, I'm sure, of this. But these hospitals are all over the country. And all of these hospitals were created. Michael Reese's hospital was created by a very philanthropic family. And their two requirements was, one, it was called Michael Reese Hospital, and two, that the doors were open to all. So I came in and reminded my board of our early beginnings. And had it not been for those people, had it not been for that hospital, had it not been for the culture created within that hospital, we would not be here today. And that hit home. And I said, we need to remember that and stay focused on that in everything we do. So together, let's develop core values around that and think through what is ours to do. We're not a foundation that can do everything. We're very small. And so what is our lane? And let's have that conversation. So somebody asked the question, how do I bring two divergent groups on my board together? Come up with core. The first thing we did was develop core values around our history. And history is important because it is, to me, the pathway forward. And so by reminding them of our early beginnings and we all coming to agreement on our early beginnings, we then could move forward together. And the trust just happened because we're moving in the same direction. And one of my board members likes to say, we're rowing together. And he actually got us all little small row paddles. So that reminds us every day of that we're rowing together. We have the same history and we're moving in that direction for what is ours to do. We are the result of a public hospital. We must serve the public. So that, help me sell the public strategy. We were funded by public monies, and we need to serve the community that we have always served, those most in need. And think about a hospital. They're responsive quickly to the current crisis. So COVID was for us an opportunity to act more like a hospital without walls. What is ours to do? As to serve the community with a public health lens. And that's how we found ourselves here today. So that just continues. If you keep that theme going from the very beginning, there's a lot of trust there.
That's great. Thank you, Gayla. So Angelique, I want to ask you about the what you talked about in terms of, you said, I would like my board to ask larger questions.
You know, when I first started, and I think some foundations function this way, and maybe nonprofits do too, the way board meetings were happening is that the board was coming together and looking at each grant that was being proposed one by one by one. And this is, to me, not a good use of the board's time. Program staff are brilliant. They're more proximate. They've done due diligence. And that is why when we send out the board book and we ask for comments, questions, conflicts, we want the board to have done their homework. And then if they do, I mean, there's room to weigh in if someone has a problem with anything. But I think it's really important to do that prior to a board meeting, just out of respect for staff, to give them time to prepare for something. But it's also like not the best use of the board's time when we're together. We are focusing on at Field, we have different focus areas. Justice is one. As a whole, we fund Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC organizers, artists, journalists, storytellers. We fund organizers that are working on systemic hacks, on issues of our time. You know, they're trying to figure out what housing will look like. They're trying to figure out what happens to the undocumented population. They're trying to figure out what, if police reform is possible, what defunding looks like, what abolition looks like, what does this mean? These are really big topics that a board should be diving into. You know, we have an opportunity in philanthropy where we sit sort of in the interstitial spaces between sectors. We are not organizers per se, but we are led by organizers. We can convene with the public sector. We can sit shoulder to shoulder with the private sector. And so the time that we have together should really be being led by those that are the visionaries and nonprofits doing the work, pulling together to say, how do we further what we aim to do? If we're about justice, if we're about unlocking equity, what is our responsibility? Asking those big questions of a board's time, I think, is better use for staff and better use for the board.
Excellent. So Cheryl, for you, this is, would you talked about a couple things specifically. You talked about orientation to faith as a guiding principle, and you also talked about the importance of ensuring that all board members are heard and included. So which of those in the moment do you feel inclined to speak to?
I think I touched on the second one already. So I'll touch on the first. We are Holy Family Ministry. So our very name tells you that, you know, there's faith in there. We were founded, we started out as a school, founded back in 1985 by Holy Family Lutheran Church, which sits in Cabrini Green. Still sits there today, though Cabrini doesn't look anything like it looked back in the 80s. So our very nature is based on a strong faith, belief in God. We have board members. It doesn't mean that all of our board members are Lutheran. I am not Lutheran. It doesn't mean that our staff is Lutheran or that they're even Christian for that nature. But we do all come to Holy Family with the belief that there's something bigger than us and there's something greater than us. And so spirituality is something that we really, really do talk about and we practice. Truth be told, we practice it through a Christian lens, but we also practice it just through the conversations of purpose, the conversations of why we're here, the conversations of the work we're called to do or led to do or feel inspired to do. For our board, we start each board meeting with a devotion. It doesn't have to be a prayer. The person can bring a devotional reading, inspirational reading, and we typically do have a prayer, however. And I think that it guides our work. We constantly come back to asking this question, is this part of the mission? Is this something that God would want us to do? Is this something that we feel like, we're being inspired or led to do? As leader of the organization, I start every meeting with a prayer. If I'm meeting with one person or if I'm meeting with 5 people, I usually start with prayer. And I think that, and I ask people to pray. I'm not always the one to pray. And it's interesting to watch, like, people who would never pray, who would say, I'll do it this time, that they are developing their own core of a spiritual nature in their own center. It really is important to us as an organization to have that centering piece, because it does help us as we make decisions along the way for what we feel is best for the children we serve.
Thank you, Cheryl. So I know we have about 10 more minutes. Something that I think I'd like to ask is around, if you could make one change to your board, what would that be? As a leader, as a mission driver?
This is a question we are dealing with right now. So 9 of my board members, as I mentioned, are appointed by the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. So generally they're white, privileged, engaged board members who are Jewish. So fairly homogenous group with a very, all philanthropic, volunteers, and on a lot of other boards, but they don't contribute to the diversity of our board. And it's a challenge. And so I have suggested to our partner, the Jewish Federation, that we need to take this journey together to figure out how we can appoint board members to our board that reflect the values from Jewish Federation's perspective, but also represent other communities. The Jewish Federation is really good at building those networks and communities and relationships all across the world, but also all across Chicago and in all communities. For those who may have attended a couple of years ago, there was a service after the Pittsburgh shooting. You had every color, race, creed, religion, and language even in that room. And it was the most beautiful, emotional service. And those are partners of the Jewish Federation. So if I had the power, I would ask the Jewish Federation to think broadly about appointing board members to those seats that align with Jewish Federation, but also align with the communities in which they live.
Thanks, Kayla.
I think what I would do is something that we're kind of thinking through right now, which is the process of my board chair, Gloria, talking with every board member about what is the role of and responsibility of a board member at a racial justice foundation. I think, we had a nominating committee. We brought on 3 new board members in the last couple of years: Kathy Cohen, who I mentioned, Lisa Lee, who runs the National Public Housing Museum, and Nicholas Pierce, who is a reverend and also a professor at Kellogg. And I, instead of a nominating committee, I might create sort of a governance committee, a meta reflection committee, where the board is actually charged with looking at itself and looking at how it operates, and really spending like a good period being reflective on how do you innovate in that space, which may lead to creating more room for other board members. It may lead to terming off for certain board members. It may lead to more interactivity with staff in between board meetings. Actually, that's a really good idea. I think I might do that. So that is one thing.
You should do that.
Kayla likes it. She's going to take it.
Yeah, it works exactly the way you're talking about it. We've had a governance committee for a couple of years, and it's exactly what you hope for.
Yeah. So I think that I would do that. But But I think I would also just create more room if I could wave a wand. Having new board members brings so much like different vibe and life into the space. And so I would just, continue to add new voices without wanting to lose anyone. I would want to just sort of bring more of that energy into our board space.
Thanks, Angelique.
Angelique, congratulations on Nicholas Pierce. He's just a wonderful person and dynamic. He was actually our graduation speaker for 8th grade virtual graduation last year.
Oh, lucky 8th graders.
Yeah, very much so. Jackie, that's a hard question. One thing, really? I mean, geez. But I guess I would say, this goes back to something Angelique spoke of a little earlier, the removing the idea that a good board member has to have money and has to be rich or has to have a certain amount of money. And also removing the fear that by talking about diversity and bringing on people of color, we won't have money, which is very bigoted thinking. I mean, I'm not saying all of my board members think this way, but the few have made some comments that concern me that, Black people don't have money or don't have the kind of money we have. And although that may be true for some, there are very elite and rich Black people. But even if that were the case, what about the people who don't have money, who can bring so much to your board in the way of ideas, innovation, creativity, connections, enthusiasm, work ethic, and so that's the one thing I think sometimes my board members fear that when I talk about bringing on, they feel like I'm trying to get rid of them. And well, if you've served on a board for 20 years, maybe, but the truth is that, it doesn't diminish the accomplishments of the great board that I have, because they've done some wonderful things, including build a building from the ground up, a $9 million building for our students. And it's a beautiful building. But I just would think that if we could just get rid of the fear notion and the notion that a board member must have money to serve on this board would be something that I would look forward to.
It's great. So I want to take us bigger now. We're all in the city of Chicago or environs. And, when you think about looking at the present state of our city and our people and the ideal state, we are talking, all the people in the audience are part of philanthropic organizations. They're nonprofits, they're foundations, they're consultants. What would you like to see? What would you say to all of our people here about what is needed of you? What is needed of your organization? Whether it is, through a paradigm shift, which I think, we may be at this time called to. What comes to mind? What is on your heart?
Well, I don't want to go back to the way things were. So there are many lessons learned during this. There are many new processes we've all built. There are many changes in our business practice, and we are thinking about making more. I don't want that momentum to change. I don't want people to wish for what was. One of our incubation projects is working with community health clinics and FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, to look at how did they have to change their business practice, their staffing models, and their flow to serve their customers, to provide delivery of care. And what are they seeing as a result? Many are seeing way better outcomes, reduced or zero no-show rates. And how are they doing that? And how do we lift up those practices and elevate them as right now demonstration projects, but what policy do we need to change so that they are implanted in the way we do business going forward? So don't look back. That's all I ask. Look forward.
Love it.
And I want to speak a little bit to those on this call who might be with foundations. I feel it's time for all of us in the private, the public sector to really find ways that we can work together better. Foundations are shifting their missions based on, racial equity, and that's great. And I think it's wonderful. But I also, I don't want foundations to be too narrow, I think, in their focus. I have to say that many times, as a private Christian organization, we have not been eligible for funds because of the nature of our faith-based organization. And I don't understand that. We still serve the same children as, say, a Lawndale YMCA that maybe doesn't have, Christian in it. It's still the same kids, and so I want us to think about, when you talk about paradigm shifts, I want us to think about a way to be more inclusive as a society of everyone. And how can we help each other? How can what we're doing at Holy Family help someone at the Phil Foundation? Or how can the Phil Foundation help someone at Michael Reese? And just, really finding ways. And yes, I know we all do one thing, or we fit in certain buckets, but still, it doesn't always have to be in the way of money. It could just be in the way of resources or the way of networking, and just to really expand this world that has become so small because of things like Zoom now, where we can all benefit, and those we serve, the populations we serve, can truly benefit from more communality, or being communal in the ways that we help each other.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cheryl. Angelique, bring us home.
I am asking myself personally, like, what I'll bring from this, and then asking myself as the head of an organization, how this will transform how we work. I think for myself, I want to I've learned how to be rooted at home, how to be centered in myself. And that is such a gift. I've also learned how to connect, digitally, metaphysically, to these bigger ideas spiritually, to the universe in a different way. And so I want to move forward very rooted in self and very connected to each of you and what we want to achieve. COVID is a blacklight of so many inequities that are already there. And as we emerge from the pandemic, we absolutely cannot solve for COVID, because we will be solving for the wrong thing. Each of us, we have this window, we have this moment where we need a racialized analysis. If we don't have it, now's the time to train up, and to continually to train up, or else we are going to create policies and practices to solve for COVID that will get us right back into the situation. So we need that. We need to realize that the future is indigenous. The things that we've learned to stay in place, to care for our neighbors, that mutual aid is how we all save each other and ourselves, that's something that needs to transform into a workspace that we can't compartmentalize, not even for a panel. I'm still a mom, who's got to help her kid figure stuff out. And so I don't want to return to sort of a paradigm that forces me into compartments. And so how do we actually reimagine liberated spaces within our institution, within ourselves, and within our communities so that people can thrive? That requires an intentional rejiggering of systems, and we're up for it. We're ready for it. So that's what I think, if each of us from an F sector step forward, that's what awaits us.
Just taking this all in. Thank you for that vision. So we're going to close now. We're really grateful for all three of you. And I want to acknowledge Key Montgomery at Forefront for being the magic behind this program and the whole series. And so next month, be back here, April 6th, and the topic is ethics in fundraising. So thank you all.
Thank you, Jackie. You did a wonderful job. Thank you, Key. Thanks to my colleagues. It was so fun learning with you and sharing with you.
Ditto. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jackie.
I agree. Big thank you,
everybody,
Jackie,
for being here.
Be well, everyone.
Bye, everybody.